Greetings, Guardians, my name is Byfear. Today we're going to be looking at one of life's great questions. What comes next? No profound answers from me on how this applies to reality and what happens after we die, but in Destiny, astoundingly enough, I think we might now have an answer. Sort of. After our journey into the Traveler, conversations with a few hunters, and a look at how things work a little bit more closely with the light, I think we have more insights than ever into the nature of what happens after death. Granted, I think it'd be fair to say that the answer of what happens after you die also depends on who you are and what powers you're interacting with, but as a general rule, I think the afterlife might actually exist in Destiny. So today, that's what we're going to be exploring. But first, a very big thank you to the sponsors of this video at Starforge. You might have seen that on the GCX Charity Marathon this year, they were kind enough to offer up a PC as an incentive to donate to St. Jude Children's Research Hospital during my block. Their generosity for doing this was pretty staggering, and I'm really proud to have them as a sponsor for that reason alone. But I'm also glad to have them as a sponsor because of their excellent PCs. If you want to buy one for yourself, go ahead and hit the link down below. You will be able to get a 2-year parts and labor warranty when you get a Starforge PC, and it's all assembled for you, so you don't need to fuss about anything to do with expensive parts and potentially making a mistake when you build it yourself. You can also pick up one of Starforge's PCs at almost any level of budget, be it one of their budget-friendly PCs such as the Horizon 2, or one of their fully spec'd content creator-style rigs such as the Voyager 2 Elite. Click the link down below and grab yourself a PC from Starforge today. And thanks again to Starforge for sponsoring this video. So, I guess if we're going to start at the beginning, we should really talk about the Hive. In all of the lore of Destiny, the first note that we get about anything having a soul or being shepherded to another life comes from their lore and the surrounding story of the Taken King expansion. So we should start there with a few odd tidbits. And before we do, I know that there are going to be some of you who sit there and are like, hey, but us Guardians are direct proof of an afterlife, right? We've been reborn again. Do we have souls? And the reality of it is that up until recently, we haven't actually seen many details on how that exactly worked. So it wasn't really fair to include that as the first little note. And also, we're talking about an afterlife here, the equivalent of heaven or hell. And whilst souls are a major mechanic in which that might function, it isn't something that can be proven by our resurrection back into the real world, so no, this doesn't quite qualify when looking at us. With that in mind, let's return to the Hive, and if we're going to talk about them, we should first talk about this central moment from the Taken King campaign, when we've stolen stealth tech from Rasputin a second time, and when we've recovered a part of Crota's crystalline form. After this was all done, we had to go into Crota's old throne world, and we get this line at the mission's start.
Crota's essence is being prepared for the next realm.
So the Hive are conducting a death ceremony, and Crota's essence is being prepared for the next realm. This, combined with the idea of green fire of the Hive being called Soulfire, implies that the Hive have souls, and the fact that Crota's essence was being prepared for the next realm tells us that at least for the Hive, there is some kind of afterlife. But the old D1 lore doesn't stop there. Listen to this little snippet of lore here. You get this when you interact with a Hive crystal that looks a little bit like Crota's, except you find it on the Dreadnought and it's much smaller.
The soul of a Hive is sleeping inside. The disciples of Osiris believe Ascendant Hive can be reborn in our realm when the time is right and with the sacrifice of lesser Hive souls. I think this one is marked for sacrifice.
So crystals like the one that held Crota and the one that was holding this lesser Hive soul proved that they had some means of controlling the flow of one's soul, essence, self, or self after death, whatever it may be. If those assertions by the followers of Osiris are correct, then the Hive are able to store the souls of the dead, including Ascendant souls. This, in combination with Crota's soul being prepared to pass on to the next realm, seems to loosely imply that some kind of limbo or afterlife does exist for the Hive. Perhaps it is a construct that is somehow unique to them, but that doesn't mean that it's the same for all those species that we find in Destiny alongside them. Then again, when observing the hive, it's worth remembering that they are incredibly technologically advanced as a species. Yes, they have paracausal abilities, but their technology is also remarkable to an extent that most people don't recognize, because it looks like magic, and it's so very alien, and it's not like the Cabal, where you can clearly see a high-tech piece of equipment, and you can at least discern what it might be. The Hive do things to an extent that is advanced beyond the Cabal's wildest imagination. Their technology is capable of breaking the Bekenstein limit. If you understand what that means for storage capabilities and data alone, you know that the Hive have got to be using some science that is way beyond our own feeble understanding. To put it really simply, in the process of just storing data in the world's grave, the Hive were able to do this by breaking the laws of physics. The point is that understanding how to use and store souls might be some kind of scientific victory for the Hive, rather than a power born of paracausality or their pact with the worms or magic, but who knows? If it is, then it would imply that all things do have a soul of some kind. Then again, I don't put it past the possibility that this is to do with their pact with the worms. Then again, if they don't feed the worms, they die anyway. Their immortality is not granted to them beyond death. That's exactly the opposite point. This raises the interesting question of how much of a Hive ritual is technically magic and how much of it is science, especially when you look at the records like those of the Inquisition of the Damned, which also give us more insight into the possibility of an afterlife and the idea of Hive souls. In the Inquisition of the Damned, it's a story about a trio of Hive siblings, and they plan to essentially ascend and take over the brood on the moon. They see all of those who have risen in Crota's wake as being weak, and they believe that they alone are the ones that can snuff out this old order and bring in a stronger new one. And in order to do this, they create a terrifying ritual. This ends up with one of the trio of siblings being murdered and then having their soul extracted, held in place momentarily, and then another of them is murdered, and the first soul from the original one of the trio is placed in the second one's body. This results in the soul of a Hive Knight being implanted into the body of a Hive Wizard. The wizard's soul is then quickly lost and stolen away by Savathun, and the ritual is then complete. The third sibling, the practitioner who did all of this, was then swiftly killed by the resurrected Night Soul Wizard. But the key thrust of all of this is the fact that they had the ability to take all of their souls and just manipulate them in their own rituals. A terrifying prospect for a number of bodily horror and dysmorphia reasons, but also because having the ability to manipulate one's essence after death doesn't feel quite right, does it? This also leads us to a certain conclusion about what happens to Hive souls if they're not preserved or used in a ritual. And that's thanks to the end of the Inquisition of the Damned law. The conductor of the ritual that I mentioned earlier, the one who kills their two siblings, is a Hive called Malkanth, and before she ends up dying, her soul is momentarily ensnared by Savathun as well. Malkanth was actually killed by the resurrected sibling, whose soul she had put in the other sibling's body. Malkanth's last moments before being left behind by Savathun are recorded within the Apocrypha of the Inquisition of the Damned law. The relevant excerpt reads as follows and is a conversation between Malkanth and Savathun. Malkanth is the first to speak. Savathun is the second. What then? When immortality and the totality of space and time can be joined to learn the last of the unknowns? When the final absolute falls, reality will shudder and blink, and a new absolute will emerge. An ending, total and complete. You wish to see that end? I wish to ensure it does not come to pass. Will you take me with you? I had considered such a thing, but no, your purpose is served. How so if I have failed? You have failed in furthering your own goals, poor thing. Not mine. Malkanth considers these words and is overcome with a sudden final sense of dread as she feels her essence fade to nothingness. her last thought is of her sister. Fun little side note, by the way. That was Savathun hinting at the Witness and the Final Shape back in Shadowkeep, and the idea of what she was going to try and do. This was Bungie's writers long ago setting up the idea that Savathun was going to betray the Witness. They laid the foundations for this stuff pretty early on, and that's just cool to see. Turns out that maybe Shadowkeep was more of a big start to things than people realize, but of course, all of it's buried deep in the lore. I really need to revisit Inquisition of the Damned, it's such a good lore book. Anyway, back to the topic of Hive Souls. At the very end there, you can see that when released into nothingness by Savathun, Malkanth's soul just fades into nothing. So perhaps the Hive don't have an afterlife in the sense that we understand it. Their life essence is perhaps a malleable thing that must be prepared to pass on like Crota's was, lest it be whisked away into the ether and left to fade. I don't know this to be a direct comparison, and I'm certain that I'm butchering a small degree or maybe a large degree of cultural heritage by mentioning this, but it does remind me of the old stories of the afterlife in ancient Egypt, where your soul was weighed according to your virtues, and if you were not found virtuous enough, you were cast aside into the jaws of a ravenous beast. If you were virtuous enough, however, you would depart into the equivalent of heaven. This, of course, is taking into account the idea that ascendant souls can be prepared for the next realm and that most other Hive souls will simply flit and flicker away. Interesting prospect, interesting possibility, but not exactly a perfect one-to-one comparison. There are other places where some commentary is made on the nature of afterlife that don't involve the Hive, though, and in particular, it's here that I want to turn to the Scions. We get an interesting insight or two into this thanks to a bunch of different places. There are the recordings of the Scion known as Match, who states that they worship their ancestors when talking to Emperor Callus, but I think the really important one that has to be highlighted isn't this, it's actually the record of a Scion prisoner of war captured in the Season of the Chosen by Lord Saladin. This is long before he started to serve alongside the Scions on the Cabal War Council, and the Lortab sees him interrogating a Scion who was also captured in another attempt on Zavala's life. This is fascinating, because for just a moment, Saladin gets a look into the Scion consciousness by connecting with one mentally, and it is like nothing we've ever seen. It also gives us a direct look into the afterlife as the Scions perceive it. This lore tab, which is really illuminating, can be found in the From the Front lore book. It's the Vertigo entry, and it reads as follows. I never could understand you Scions. Lord Saladin gazed broadly over the precipice of the wall at the rocky wilderness below. Nearby, Osiris watched the Scion prisoner, restrained by a set of centuries-old iron shackles. Saladin continued, You were conquered by the Cabal, and in the face of a superior military force, you did what you had to do to survive. There's no shame in that. The Scion flared their moist facial flaps and fixed their lone eye on the Iron Lord. Saladin wondered whether they were glaring in defiance or struggling to breathe within their helmet. He marveled at their repulsiveness. But even after Callus fled and Gaul was defeated, you still grovel before tyrants like Keitel. If you rose up, you could taste true independence instead of the patronizing scraps that she offers. Saladin shook his head in contempt. Your power is wasted by cowardice. In the silence that followed, the Iron Lord noticed a curious change in the surrounding atmosphere. The air filled with a sharp frequency, not a sound, but a high-intensity vibration that seemed to emanate from inside his own head, like a blossoming migraine. Osiris chuckled. Our friend disagrees. Saladin snarled and grabbed the Scion by their shackled wrists. He dragged his prisoner to the edge of the wall and held them over the precipice. He was amazed at how light they were without armor, like a scrawny little bird. Osiris sniffed in distaste and looked back toward the lost city. He doubted Saladin's ham-fisted style of interrogation would work, but the Scion had resisted his own subtler approach. Where did they get the light dampening tech? How did they modify the prediction engines? Saladin snapped. The Iron Lord held firm as the Scion struggled weakly in his grasp. Where are they? Where's the rest of the cell? The Scion's lone eye fluttered wildly, and Saladin felt a sudden rush of vertigo, as if he was the one with the 100-meter drop beneath him. The Titan steeled himself. We will find them eventually. You can't control that. The only thing you can control now is your own survival. Tell me where they are. The Scion began to tremble, like an animal shivering in the cold, but they said nothing. Instead, they assaulted the Iron Lord with another wave of vertigo. The wall felt as if it were flexing and tilting beneath the Titan. He growled through clenched teeth. Last chance. Where are they? Suddenly, Osiris was at Saladin's side. The vertigo broke. Lord Saladin, he urged. This is a waste of time. You of all people should recognize unrelenting stubbornness when you see it. You're right. Saladin regarded the Scion with quiet admiration. If the roles were reversed, I'd rather die than betray my loyalty. The Iron Lord gave the Scion a nod of respect, and then effortlessly hefted them over the edge. In the split second before gravity took hold, Lord Saladin met the Scion's gaze. He suddenly saw himself reflected in the creature's Y-shaped pupil. A ferocious ogre in metal armor, filled with violence. A dull primate infused with godlike power. A fragile mind cursed with immortality. Saladin felt the creature's terror, but he also felt the expanse of the Scion's ancestors yawn forth beneath him. He felt their hands reach up to embrace him in a comforting void. He heard the ringing chorus of their timeless harmony call to him. A kaleidoscopic array of emotion surged through his heart, such that he'd never known as a human. For that fleeting moment, he was at peace. Then the Scion was gone, and Saladin was alone with Osiris once more. The passage here raises incredible questions about what happens to one's consciousness after death. Of course, Scions are a particular species because they are generally considered to be more mind than matter, and so it's not impossible to see that they might have been able to find a way to maintain themselves without their physical forms. The Scions are able to do remarkable things with their physical forms thanks to the strength of their minds. We've seen Scion Flayers literally combine into a larger compound being. This was Inatam back in the Season of Dawn, a trio of Scions who combined into one ultimate being. A being we still defeated, but a being of three minds turned into one and uniting their bodies into one as well. It's something remarkable, and it's something that only the Scions seem to be able to do. The Scions are also remarkable because in all of the different writings, they seem to be able, as implied, to exist beyond death. There is a reason they worship their ancestors, and it's clear to see from this passage alone. Their union with each other is one that reaches across time and space, through life and death, beyond the physical realm. They exist within each other, a continuous consciousness, a harmony of voices, something that perhaps exists as an afterlife of sorts, so long as the Scion people persist. Their union with each other is similar to the way in which they connect with their ancestors, through thought and emotion portrayed through one's mind. I imagine that for the Scions it's a lot more complex, but we humans interpret all of these notions as vivid splashes of color and sudden waves of feeling that wash over us. They are purer manifestations of thought than we are, and as long as one of them is alive seemingly, they are able to connect to their afterlife. Although, maybe the afterlife is independent of them, and it is some kind of nod to the idea that their thought forms, their true realm of thought, is able to persist, even past the death of their people. It's worth remembering at this point that this all could be because of their psionic power, and that we really have no idea what true psionic power is and where it comes from. Whilst this is pure conjecture for the moment, I think there is a safe bet to be made that it is somehow tied to the darkness, given that the darkness is a power linked to the unconscious realm and the power of one's own mind. But the potential for it to be something even more complex is still there. Doubtless, it's also central to the Scion's equivalent of an afterlife. Reuniting with one's ancestors is something which is pretty common in most interpretations of death. So, yeah, I would imagine that for the Scions, that equivalent of an afterlife is a thing that exists. Maybe it is just a story they've all told themselves, but I can't help but shake that feeling, especially after you look at the idea that beings such as Nezarec dominated the Scions. Strange to think about. Doesn't give us conclusive answers, but it's another interesting example of how the afterlife might come about in the universe of Destiny. And then, of course, there was nothing. For a very long time, there were very few things that gave us direct commentary on the nature of the afterlife in Destiny. That was until Final Shape. And then we ran into Cayde again, and we heard from Micah 10. And suddenly the questions of what the afterlife might look like gained a brand new set of answers. First, there was what Cayde said to us when we ran into him in the tower. Here, he directly describes what he saw after his death and how he felt. Take a listen.
And after that, nothing. But not a bad nothing. A peaceful nothing. I think I felt her there too, my ghost. Sundance, she was part of me. Or I was part of her. Like we were two cards shuffled back into our deck, whole again. And then there was pain. Separation, something pulling me out.
I don't know about all of you, but that's possibly the most comforting description of the afterlife I've heard in some media. A peaceful sense of belonging and wholeness that requires nothing more than you to simply be. And then there's what Cayde said to Ikora after the two of them reunited. Over the radio, he describes more of what it was like to die.
Can I ask you something deeply personal?
Shoot.
What did you see when you died your final death?
Now, that ain't fair.
No, it isn't.
Light. So bright it burned me all the way up, but I didn't feel any heat. Not a lick. I didn't feel anything, actually. Not with my body, because I left that back there. You Thanatonauts might call it being one with the Traveler, but I call it home. No pain. No fear. No Vanguard paperwork. That's heaven.
And Sundance?
She was shining there too. You want to know a secret? I miss it. Even more than I miss you.
Cayde's description here also gives us some really crucial context. It might be context that's only relevant for Guardians and their ghosts and their final deaths, but it's important context nonetheless. I think the important thing we can pick up on here is the defining difference between their body and their soul. This idea that a body and a soul are distinct entities is known as dualism, and it's not some religious belief, it's a series of ideas expressed throughout many faiths in the world today, be it the Judeo-Christian faiths such as Islam, Judaism, or Christianity, or be it the many religious ideas that were founded in Asia and are now broadly referred to as Hinduism. In fact, I think Hinduism actually gives us what is probably the best idea of a parallel here to what Cayde experiences, and that's the idea that's expressed in some Hindu faiths, which is known as moksha. Moksha is a religious belief that's linked in with the idea of samsara, which is a whole other concept to do with living many lives and achieving enlightenment through spiritual growth over those many lifetimes. But the end result of that spiritual growth and the enlightenment that you achieve over those many lifetimes, that is moksha. It is escaping the cycle of samsara, and ultimately it leads to one reuniting with Brahman, the true essence of all existence in Hindu faith, or some Hindu faiths. It's worth noting, Hinduism is a blanket term that I think was invented by the British Empire when we went and conquered India, So to call something Hinduism is... It's not the same. It's a polytheistic series of faiths that has been developed over time, and even just me making broad commentary on it belies the true depth of it all. I'm sure someone will be able to correct me in the comments here. This is my rudimentary understanding, so please go ahead and correct me as needs be. The point is, there is a similar concept here in Destiny. Cayde leaves behind his body, and ultimately finds this place where he is at peace, where he is enlightened, and more importantly, where he returns to the Traveler, the true essence of all existence. Guardians in this sense are able to reunite with the Traveler and achieve peace and enlightenment. And finally, to back this up even further, and the idea that yes, there is an afterlife in Destiny, we have the words of Micah 10 to consider. She, as you may know, is a speaker, and that means that she is able to gain some unique insights from the Traveler itself. Within the Traveler, we're able to find relics and memories of the Traveler that manifest as small versions of it, found within the Pale Heart, and whenever you interact with one of them, Micah is able to have a vision directly from the Traveler's memories. Micah at one point has a vision that is genuinely revelatory for this topic in particular, and it's one where she sees what the promises are for those who die their final deaths as Guardians. Take a listen.
There's an imprint of the Traveler's experiences in this object. Images, emotions, I will try to interpret as best I can. I feel unity, peace, a sense of belonging and home here. Inside the Traveler, there's completion, a sense of duty fulfilled. There's another realm or space? No, a state of being. Union with the Traveler, light returned and now memory as well. An eternity within the Traveler, with all Guardians who experience their final deaths. An afterlife? That's all I could make out.
Cayde spoke of his experiences after death as peaceful, and as if he wasn't alone. Perhaps there's truth to this, that there can be something at the end.
For Guardians, I don't know if I want the Traveler's Heaven. If the people I hope to find won't be there waiting for me.
We cannot be sure of anything. These visions are difficult to parse. Do not give up hope yet, Commander.
Now, what Micah says here tells us a lot, but I think Zavala also brings a fair perspective on that notion of a final death in this manner. He makes a valid point that whilst the afterlife might exist for some Guardians, that it would be invalid to call it a sort of heaven, because if it excludes those who you're hoping to see at the end of life, those who are without the light, then it can't be a truly perfect afterlife, or maybe even an afterlife worth living. And I understand where he's coming from. Zavala would love to see his wife and his son again. He would love to be reunited with them, and also doubtless Taj, whenever the afterlife comes for him. But I don't think it's as grim as Zavala states. I genuinely do believe what Ikora and Micah are saying, and there's a reason for that. There's one note made by another speaker long ago, one we should remember, and it's this. The light lives in all things, in all places. You can try to block it and to stamp it out, but the light finds a way. If the light does live in all things and all places, then Zavala's fears should not be something he clings to, because that means that the light resided within his wife and son all the same. Life is the very energy and essence and force of creation itself, and so it is possible then that everyone has a spark of light within them. So then perhaps this is the answer. The light resides in all living things, and if there is an afterlife for Guardians, those who are in direct union with the Traveler, there will eventually be that union for everyone who has been created. Whether that's true or not needs further examination, perhaps a skilled Thanatanaut warlock to explore the afterlife in a more permanent manner. But for now, let's take comfort as guardians in this notion. Even in the deepest of darkness, even as we die our final deaths, nightfall will break into day, and when we do return to the light of the Traveler, we will find ourselves complete and home once again. There's something a little comforting, isn't it? Sometimes it's a very macabre thing to talk about death. I know the Hive stuff at the very beginning, and even the idea of Saladin throwing that scion off the city wall is something that links to that, but honestly, if this is the idea of what the afterlife is like in Destiny, something where all beings end up feeling whole and complete, as though their purpose is fulfilled, and as though they can simply exist in some degree of harmony, that's comforting. Either way, thank you very much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the video. This was a very interesting one to make, and I'm glad I got to talk about it. But if you enjoyed it, you can show your appreciation by leaving a like and leaving your own thoughts down below in the comments section. Is there something I've missed that references the afterlife in Destiny? Of course, there could be more things about Guardians generally, there could be some interesting stuff from previous lives. There's all sorts of other weird bits of lore out there, I'm sure, and if I've missed something that you think is absolutely crucial to this, go ahead and let me know. I'm interested to see what you all think. And if you want to hear more stories from worlds near and far, go ahead and hit subscribe and the bell next to subscribe to turn on those email notifications. But as per usual, know that your viewership has been quite enough for me, and that in the meantime, my name is Byf. For Audacia ad Astra, I'll see you Starside.